Hello, very nice to be here. I'm Jamie, I'm the founder of Creator Fund. We invest in deep tech startups out of university campuses. And my chairman, who wears many hats.
Hi, yeah, I'm Henry Lane Fox. So I run Founders Factory, a venture studio and accelerator that operates across Europe, North America, Africa, and Asia. Sit as one of the partners at Founders Forum, partner at First Minute Capital, early stage seed fund. And a great pleasure indeed, Jamie, to chair Creator Fund, where we're uncovering amazing new deep tech companies.
So we thought we'd talk about three things today and kind of keep a conversation back and forth. Firstly, kind of what is deep tech and how should investors be thinking about it? Secondly, kind of what makes a good deep tech founder? Where should we be looking for them? And then lastly, just some kind of broad, how to support those founders, both from a kind of VC standpoint and government. I guess, Henry, kind of first question for you. You know, if we were here 5 years ago, it would all be SaaS, marketplaces, fintech. Kind of deep tech's been overlooked for quite a long time. Like, why? Why have people not cared about deep tech like they have other sectors?
Well, I think it's interesting to look at it. If you go back a long time, there has always been interest in deep tech, but I think that it's always been a general feeling that the time to scale has been too long, that the amount of capital deployed is just really, frankly, too difficult, and that there hasn't really been an ecosystem of support around those deep tech founders. And I think, as you pointed out, we've seen some successes now. We can look at companies like Darktrace and lots of others who've done really well out of the UK. We had DeepMind. We've had real breakthroughs in kind of fundamental technologies. So we're sitting in this kind of era of mass excitement about deep tech. Perhaps a little overhyped right now, one could argue, but I think there are still few investors who are brave enough to do the investing that Creator Fund does, particularly at pre-seed and seed.
And I guess we say kind of investors brave enough to touch the space. Yeah. You know, First Minute's had a huge success this week with Wave announcing one of the biggest AI funding rounds in European history. First Minute's a generalist fund. It's not necessarily an AI specialist. Like, can any investor invest in deep tech? Do you need certain skill sets? You know, how should investors be thinking about touching the space?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think that how we see it is there is a real challenge in having a multidisciplinary team that's quick enough to be able to understand some of the science and fundamental technologies and really get to that point of being a fast believer in what's possible, but then having the ability to marry that together with commercial go-to-market common sense and a little bit of investing history, I think does help. I think First Minute's a good example of that. It surrounded itself with very strong venture partners. We were a small investor, but a very happy investor in Wave, and delighted to see that company do so well. And I think we've thought the same thing as we've been building out the Creator Fund proposition, and maybe you want to take the opportunity to explain a little bit about how that model works. But I think the challenge for VCs has been, how can you very quickly get to a point of enough certainty that core scientific breakthroughs and technological innovation is going to be possible within the lifetime of a fund?
I mean, so the way we work, which kind of Henry touched on, is we have a team of 50 PhDs across 24 universities around Europe. So what we'll do is we'll kind of say, where's the most interesting innovation happening, maybe in a computer science lab in Cambridge or a quantum computing lab in Munich. And then we'll have PhDs who work for us but are on the ground looking for exciting opportunities inside university campuses. And kind of like one of the key things that we've seen is it's very hard for a PhD founder in the deep tech space to translate what they're doing into kind of the type of terms that a VC understands. Or how do you explain why your innovation in quantum computing is going to be a massive commercial opportunity that an investor can get excited by? And so we often play that kind of translation role of going in early, being that first believer because our PhDs understand the technology and can say it's exciting, and then help those companies raise, from funds like First Minute or whoever it might be, follow-on rounds. And I think that's that kind of translation piece that needs to happen. And I guess, Henry, that kind of moves into kind of the founder profile. And I think about like my relationship with you. Often our PhDs will do a lot of the work, we'll meet a lot of time with the founders, and then obviously, you chair our investment committee, so I'll come to you and say, Henry, like, can you spend 20 minutes with this founder and just give us your view? You're quite good at kind of quickly, cutting through all the complexity of qubits or mRNA or whatever it might be and be like, this founder's going to build a billion-pound company because X, or they're not because of Y. And kind of keen for your view on like, what heuristics do you use or what telltale signs do you use to know this human being in the deep tech space can build something special?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would also preface that with, I have made a lot of investments, and many of my investments have gone wrong. I am not ashamed of that. I figure I am only probably marginally better at anybody else at understanding whether somebody is going to be a great founder. But there are some, you're right, there are some traits that we talk about a lot that we look for. And I think they are universal. I don't think that they are specialist to deep tech. I think often you are looking at a much more scientific or deep academic founder. But fundamentally, for me, the skill sets of being a founder remain the same. I most want to find very, very curious individuals who are quick to use data first to try to validate assumptions, but at the same time, who are prepared, where necessary, to make decisions based on incomplete data. And I think that may sound like a simple thing to say, but the vast majority of really good founders are people who will go out and know how to validate small components of a business using a lot of data, but they understand that overwhelmingly momentum begets momentum, begets momentum, begets success. And you have to be able to be confident enough to take decisions, which is sometimes very difficult to make, based on incomplete data. So I think that's crucial. I think we all see the sales ability, not the pure sales ability of can you sit in an enterprise and sell to them as a new customer, but can you extol passion and wonder and amazement at what you're trying to do into prospective team members, into prospective customers, into prospective distribution partners, into prospective investors. I think everybody forgets really the big hidden quality in most founders, in my view, is sales.
And can I ask, with deep tech in particular, you've got Sam Altman, OpenAI, non-deep tech background. Yeah. Founder of Palantir is a PhD in social classical theory, which is a medieval historian. Maybe you feel very good that I could build something big. Yeah. Does that matter? Like, do you need the founder to be a advanced PhD from Cambridge and X, or is it okay to be more generalist as a CEO of a deep tech company?
I think all the ones we look at, I'd say first off, there are always exceptions, so I'm going to generalize here, but generalizations are probably useful. You look at the team, you look at the core founding team, and you want to find different attributes represented across that core founding team. And I think it's fine if you have got people who are heavily commercial on the one hand, and Sam's a good example of that, obviously has a deep understanding of customer and of product and a close relationship with technology. But you have to have people on the other hand who are going to be very, very, very capable academic, deep science, or extremely adept and accomplished technologists. I think if you can bring those two together, then obviously you've got that kind of dream team that people look for. But if we think back through the companies we've backed, we've had some big successes with ones where they've been led by more commercial individuals. We've also obviously been very happy wrapping commercial skill sets around very scientific founders. I mean, how do you think about that yourself?
I think especially in like the UK right now, we have this emerging trend of people going to do a PhD specifically with the intention of starting a company. So I think Demis Hassabis is quite a helpful role model. That commercial guy went to UCL, pursued a degree because he wanted to start something like DeepMind. And some of the best founders we've backed recently are ex-quantitative trader at BNY Mellon, went to go and do a PhD at the University of Glasgow in AI because he saw that large language models were going to disrupt the way we live and work, and wanted to get that technical nous to do it. We've backed a merchant banker from Goldman Sachs who was working on kind of climate change work at GS, decided to go and do a PhD in Imperial in machine vision so he could use machine vision to sort rubbish on inside recycling plants in a company called Recycli. And so it's kind of like, whereas historically I think there was a dividing line between you are in academia and therefore you're going to go and publish and get a kind of corduroy suit in a corner office in some medieval quad in Oxford, or you are commercial and you're going to sell. There's a nice fusion at the moment where universities are both the pursuit of academic excellence and innovation, but that can also translate into science and building a business.
Yeah, I think that's right. So if we maybe shift the topic a little bit, Jamie, and think around that university ecosystem, we sit, fortunately, in the UK with some very prized storage universities, many amazing research laboratories. And yet I think we often say this is now the first time we've seen a tidal wave of opportunity from a technology startup perspective coming out of those universities. What's been holding it back, do you think? And if you look ahead, what do we think is now going to change?
So I think it's partly cultural, right? Like, if you think about the UK specifically, what's been seen to be prestigious in the history of last 50 years of British universities are go and study something like classics or English, go and get a job as a barrister or in banking, and that's the kind of path people have been pushed down. And then separately, for people doing sciences, that you're kind of pushed to become a professor. And I think role models and also what's happened in America and how companies like Facebook and Snapchat and Dell have come out of university campuses, role models are quite helpful for changing the way people think about it. The second thing is I think increasingly it's interdisciplinary. So when I studied at university, I did history, I hung out with historians. You're kind of in this eco-bubble of this bubble of what you're studying. Increasingly now we're putting together PhDs in engineering with PhDs in biotech and creating those kind of opportunities for people to meet each other. And then lastly, like, it's policy, right? One of the major things that have held back UK universities historically is the university takes a huge chunk of a company in return for giving it its IP. And slowly there's change, and companies aren't having to give 30, 40% equity to Manchester or Oxford or whatever it might be, and the cap table's the type of company that an investor, generalist investor might back. I mean, how about you? I mean, you backed for Creator Fund, right? So you made the decision to give us some money to start up.
Yeah.
Part of that thesis must be universities have the potential to.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. We've always thought, universities were the untapped resource, and that there was an extraordinary range of talent out here, but far too few funds actually going to write that first check and encourage people to start companies who maybe hadn't really been thinking about it. And it was obviously super exciting when we first met, and you explained the ambition for Creator Fund at that point. I spent a lot of time trying to think about different types of VC models. We can talk about that on another time, but Creator Fund is a very, very interesting idea here, that you can tap the power of these exceptional PhDs to find the brightest peers in their labs, and then very quickly run them through a DD process that can culminate in a fast and efficient IC and a quick way to write checks. So yeah, there's a big belief in my side that it was possible to do. I think, I'm a little bit older, so my length of time looking at how often universities have managed to mess up when they've been trying to deal with IP and spin-outs over a long period of time is pretty disappointing. So I'm very delighted to see that we're finally at a government level taking action now to think, how can we set up the right frameworks for university spin-outs? I think, if you look at America, you can look at Asian universities, it's way, way simpler than it is in the UK. The amount of time you and I have spent negotiating with university faculties to help founders is frankly ridiculous. So we long for that to change quicker.
I think the other exciting thing about, if you think about kind of UK PLC, is, high quality universities are spread right across the country, right? So if you ask yourself, like, if Dundee is going to produce a unicorn, if Newcastle is going to produce a unicorn, what institution is that most likely to come from? It's most likely to come from the university. And then the increasing thing you see as well is kind of regional specialization that, Dundee as an example, the universities are producing really interesting stuff in the gaming space. You've got somewhere like Bristol, Bath, experts in engineering, places like Glasgow, which got a really good chemistry department. And so, the ability to invest right across the UK and say, okay, we're going to leverage the expertise in this department and build a business out of it, I think universities are pretty unique there. I guess that kind of leads to the next question of, like, if you do back a company coming out of the University of Glasgow or Bristol, the kind of support they need from there. And I guess, one of the things Founders Factory does is really leans into helping those founders from day one and give them the tools they need to build something big. What's most important there, of the kind of suite of things that you see a VC or investor can provide deep tech company, what do they need above all?
Yeah, I think, so I'm going to touch on two parts of that, because I think there's another part there that's really interesting, which is, if you look across the UK at the moment, and I take the UK as an example, the same thing is true in most other European countries, there are one or two universities where you'll see the breakout successes. Here, largely Imperial, Cambridge, very occasionally Oxford, you've had massive successes. But I think our very strong belief is that these deep tech founders can come from absolutely anywhere. You mentioned amazing business Malted AI that's doing knowledge distillation around LLMs based up in Edinburgh. That's an unusual place to be backing what we think will be Scotland's biggest business. We found other amazing talent in very weird pockets across Europe. We backed the world's first autonomous cargo plane that was set up in Bulgaria 7 or 8 years ago now. A company called Dronamics that has had really wonderful success. And I do firmly believe that we can get too heavily concentrated on too few research institutions. At the same time, you're also right that when you are basing yourself in an area where there are smaller pockets of talent and the smaller pockets of individuals who've built companies before, you can very easily surround yourself with extremely bad advice. And one of the problems around deep tech is that you can take a long time going around in a circle, not through your own fault, but without the right guidance to be able to break problems down into manageable chunks, to understand what you can validate, how you can move quickly enough to show progress when you're tackling often very, very complex scientific problems. I think that product mindset is often the thing that, particularly from a Founders Factory side, we try to give people early, coupled together with a very, very deep understanding of how an industry currently works and where the opportunity is to build the right business model and the right go-to-market. Founders Factory, we have a lot of corporate LPs on board, and they can be, at times, obviously, people can be cynical around corporate LPs and worry that they're going to waste everybody's time. But the flip side is they can give you amazing insights and detailed understanding of an individual industry. So I think from the deep tech startups we work with, it's really trying to help them understand where that commercial opportunity lies, what the business model is that's most likely to scale within a given industry, and then help them with product thinking, pure product development process, to make sure that they're still making incremental gains, even when they're tackling a very, very deep tech subject.
I think that's the biggest change we've seen in the last year or so. So we're writing, I don't know, £500,000 million check to get something started out of the lab. And the expectation now is that you've achieved something commercial within 18 months.
Yeah.
And 2-3 years ago, you might have still been able to raise that next round on kind of scientific progress. Now there needs to be some sort of somebody's bought this or somebody's shown meaningful interest in what I'm building. And if you're creating a drug or you're creating a new vaccine, that is harder, right? And kind of how can you get a pilot or how can you get some sort of nibble from a big pharma company that can then the next round VC say, okay, wow, okay, these guys aren't just good scientists, they've also demonstrated an ability to open the right doors with what they're trying to build.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that's bent partly out of the experience of some later stage VCs of seeing really difficult science get to a point where you need a first-of-a-kind proof of some form of manufacturing facility. And at that point, trying to fund that is incredibly difficult. Part of the reason why people are very keen on trying to make sure founders have understood where the commercial opportunities lie and have contact with people who can be future buyers is they're often the big source of capital that actually can unlock those first-of-a-kind projects. If it's not government grants, it's almost definitely not VC at the moment. There's a gap in the market, but corporate balance sheets are a really good way, and they're really exploding actually use for that kind of funding.
We've got a couple of minutes left. You see more companies than anyone I know. So I was kind of keen on a kind of quick fire. You can say one of four things. Either this category is overhyped, it's underappreciated, kind of hit its equilibrium, or it's going to bounce back. Your view, as investors in the room, is there too much money going in? Stay away, underappreciated, at equilibrium, bounce back.
Yeah,
Number one.
I guess my first thing to say is there's never enough money, because having been a founder lots of times myself, I'm always in favor of more money in the market. But yeah, let's go.
Throwing some deep tech categories at you. Okay, number one, quantum computing.
Yeah, so we're long on quantum computing. We think it's still underappreciated. Actually, rather than underappreciated, we think it's misunderstood. I think there is a huge area of software that still needs to be built, developer tools around quantum computing that nobody's really focused on at the moment. We've begun to focus on it recently. I think it's super interesting, yeah.
Large language models?
So large language models, I think, will have to go into the overhyped world. However, I think that some of the outputs of LLMs now are really interesting. So going back to Wave, autonomous vehicle is where they started. They've just done this very large billion-dollar raise. Everybody probably had read about it in the news this week. Embedded AI is a very, very, very interesting proposition, and it's being built largely off the back of innovation within LLMs. So there's a convergence between different technologies. I think there'll be really interesting steps forward. If you came to me now and said I have had a fundamental breakthrough at the LLM level, I think people will be skeptical now that you are early enough to the market to make a big difference.
And when you say overhyped, are we going to have a crypto moment for LLMs? Like, is there going to be a real market correction, or is it just going to the pace is going to slow down a bit?
I think the commercialization is proving harder. So I think that small language models are a really interesting way forwards now. I think that discrete models that can operate well for given use cases have definite commercial opportunity. I think there is still obviously going to be some very big winners. There is going to be a lot of death in the LLM.
If you were given the opportunity to invest at OpenAI at today's valuation, would you do it?
That's a great question. It's a good question what today's valuation of OpenAI really is. I think are hugely respectful. Anybody who can aggregate the type of talent that they've managed to aggregate and consistently push forward from a product perspective as effectively and as quickly as they have deserves an enormous amount of credit. I would never bet against them. I wouldn't choose to put my money into them now, but I love betting at pre-seed and seed, so late-stage investing is not my game.
Two quick one more, robotics?
Long on robotics. I think there's a huge amount still to be done there. I think it's probably having its winter at the moment. It's going to come back.
And computational biotech?
We love computational biotech.
You're bullish across the board.
And bullish across the board is terrible, isn't it? But I think that's a really underappreciated area. So for me, software relating to quantum and computational biology, two of the most interesting.
Excellent. Finished bang on time. Thank you very much. Nice to have the conversation.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everyone.